So now you've had all this press success. How are you able to leverage it for other aspects of your business?
So press is one part of the growth strategy for any business. And I would say the biggest thing that it does is provides you social proof and credibility, right? Social proof and credibility, people naturally want, like if you, like Gloria, if you and I were like walking down the street in New York and there was like this storefront and there was like this long line of people standing outside of the store, but you had no idea what was going on there, like we would be interested about it, right? Because you're like, wow, all of these other people are standing in line. There must be something here worth waiting for. That's what this press does, is because it creates digital social proof for your business.
Okay, so you've been in the CMO seat, which is the highest, like most senior seat in marketing. And now that you've founded multiple businesses, you've also done PR on your own. So can you talk to me a little bit about PR versus marketing and the more DIY approach that you've taken with PR versus, working with a huge agency, which you've also done before?
Yeah, I mean, it all, like everything else in business, it comes down to resources, right? Larger companies have an unfair advantage of having cash to deploy. So, I've been a CMO at two different companies. One was venture capital backed, the other one was private equity backed. And so the amount of resources that you have are just different. You can lean on subject matter experts within different marketing agencies to be able to help your business grow or continue to grow. And so in the past, I've worked with, some of the largest PR agencies. It's the classic like New York City agency. You look at their website, you see all these big logos of like, the like the food brands that you eat, the companies that like ship your products, the companies that, you get your cell phone from. And so when you are working with those large agencies, they have a lot of experience, they have a lot of built-in relationships, but you're also paying a lot of money to be able to leverage that knowledge and expertise. And it was a little bit of a shock to me when I went off to go start my own venture, how much I had to learn. And a lot of it was really, really daunting. And I think that's where it was, I don't know if like fate is the word to describe it, but I was so fortunate to be able to get an introduction to you and meet you, because you really opened my eyes to some of the areas that in the past I just took for granted because I was working with these large PR agencies. So even though I had a background in marketing, I'm a marketer by trade. And so because of that, a lot of the branding, the messaging, the words on my website are about the features of our products and how they benefit customers. And in the past, the thing that was happening behind the scenes that these big PR agencies were doing is translating that into what journalists want to hear and what journalists want to write about. And what I love about what you're going out and you're teaching is you're showing founders and even seasoned marketers like myself how to do that themselves. Because in this world that we live in today, where it could cost you $500,000 to open up a brick and mortar retail shop, or you can spend $500 and open up a Shopify store, the PR starter pack and companies like Shopify have been able to level the playing field so that in these David and Goliath situations, that the underdog has a chance of winning. And the underdog has just as equal of a chance of being able to spread their message and get their word out, because that's what every entrepreneur wants, right? Every entrepreneur has a problem or an itch that they want to go out and solve, and they wanted to be able to help other people solve that same problem. And so I had to learn how exactly to do that.
Now, was that worth your time? Because I think a lot of people think, either I pay someone else to do it and depend on that relationship, or I just don't do PR. And what have you learned about doing it on your own, and very successfully, by the way, because you've been on so many features now. So tell me about how that curtain has been lifted.
I think at one point, it took me a while for CPR to really like click for me. And what I mean by that is when you create something yourself, it's like your baby. And when you go out and you tell other people about it, like you're so excited about it that you want other people to be just as excited about it. And the challenge is that good journalism is not an advertisement, right? And so when you read a magazine, magazines already have advertisements in them. You don't want articles that are also advertisements. And so being able to understand what the trends are in the world and what's happening in the world outside of your company and how your company can be a part of that conversation and can contribute and further that discussion is a big difference versus like your marketing language that you might have on your website, which could work perfectly well in your website. But when you go out and you pitch that, it really took me some time to really like sit down and absorb your CPR method in order to be able to understand like how to send those emails, how to send those pitches in a way that hooks somebody and makes them more interested, and in a way that builds credibility where you might not have credibility in that space or authority in that space today. And the truth of the matter is that like all these people that we look up to where we're like, they know so much about this, right? They've spent so much time doing that. All of them had to start from square one at some point in time. Like none of them were born with that credibility. Nobody wakes up and, is born as a newborn baby and is an expert in, whatever the area is. That's something that's learned and that authority is built over time. But all of them, everybody that we look up to that have these blue check marks on their social media profiles had to start from square one at some point.
Yeah. And what about what it taught you in terms of doing that own exercise, getting clear on your message and not relying on someone to kind of do it for you? Like what have you learned? Because you've done it both ways.
So, I mean, let's go back to the event that I hosted, an online event, a virtual summit at the beginning of the pandemic, right? It was May of 2020. And when I sat down with you, Gloria, my pitch was, I'm hosting this big event. I want everybody to come. Here's the benefits. If people show up to this event, X, Y, and Z, this is what they're going to get. And what I was doing there was trying to create news, right? I was trying to like get a message out where I wanted the focus to be about this event. And where I was off was being able to take a look at what was happening at the time. And what was happening at the time was the class of 2020 was about to graduate. And when that class of 2020 started college, they were starting college while the economy was at an all-time high. College graduates were getting paid more than they ever were after graduation. Jobs were available. People got degrees. It's like, you grow up as a child and you're told you go to college, you graduate from college, you get a good job. That's just the way that life is supposed to work. And that's what the class of 2020 was supposed to experience. And then all of a sudden the pandemic starts. Companies are laying off thousands, millions of workers. And that class in just 2 months had the carpet pulled out from under them. And this was similar to what I experienced in 2009 after the recession in 2008, where I graduated from college in 2009 and had a really hard time finding a job after college. And so I wanted to be able to host this event for the class of 2020, to be able to help them navigate. I wanted to create the event that I so desperately needed back in 2009. And when I started to understand what the wave was that was already occurring with the class of 2020, that wave was much bigger than any wave that I could have created. And so by being able to tell a story and being able to contribute to that existing conversation about what was happening with the class of 2020. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and our local newspaper here was the Tennessean. I sent an email to not to the editor of the Tennessean because they get so many pitches, but I went and I looked at who is normally writing about the economy, who is normally writing about the local companies that are hiring, or who's writing about companies that are announcing that they're opening offices in Nashville. And I wrote an email to that person, and within a few days we were on the phone. And I think a week later, there was a photo published in the Tennessean from my event and talking about the class of 2020, as well as my experience having a hard time finding a job after college myself, and how I went out to go help other people do the same. And I think that's like a story that, like, every entrepreneur, there's something about like your hometown paper that, no matter how big or how small of a publication it is, it's a cool thing to be a part of your local community and like contributing to your local community. But had I have just sent out like a press release that was just like, I am hosting this event on this day at this time with these speakers, I doubt that that would have gotten any momentum.
Yeah. And so the CPR method, would you say, kind of not only gave you a framework to pitch, but it kind of changed the way you have dialogues with anybody in the future, right? Because then you went on to speak at panels and, get awards. And I mean, you just had tremendous success. When I Google your name now, it's like this whole, I see a lot on you.
I would say the hardest one is the first time, right? And like everything else in this world, like, it's tough being on social media and seeing all these like incredible things that other people are doing. And when you go to like these websites for new companies, you see all these logos on those sites. It's really easy as an early entrepreneur to like get down on yourself and have like logo envy, and to think, gosh, like, how am I going to do this? I don't have that. The hardest one is just the first one. The hardest one is just the first one, because to get the first one, you have to understand that pitching is all about getting rejected. It's all about getting rejected and being okay with getting rejected, and understanding that that's part of the process. And, like everything else in life, it only takes one. It only takes one yes, whether that's raising funding for your company, to close your first round, you only need one lead investor to be able to, get that dream story, that dream coverage that you want to be able to get out, because you want to be able to go make a difference in this world and go help and serve other people. It only takes one yes. And so, from there, the second, the third, the fourth one becomes progressively easier to be able to do, because you're starting to build that authority and credibility. But that's something that for the first one, you have to go out and just do. And to be able to go out and just do, I think, was the hardest part, because, I went through the CPR method, and I wrote out the pitch. And then I think I like sat on that pitch for like a week, and I didn't email it out to anybody, because I knew that I would get emails back saying thanks, but no thanks. Or like, even worse, maybe, I don't know. Like, I knew that there would be a lot that I would just send and not hear back from. And I didn't want to feel that. I didn't want to feel that way. And so I just procrastinated on what inevitably I knew I needed to do, which was hit that send button and to just go for it. And I think now, like, knowing what I know now and knowing that that's part of the process, it's a lot easier to be able to handle rejection when you expect rejection, but also knowing that it only takes one.
Yeah. One thing you said to me over and over that I say all the time is, listen to what Vincent says. Everything is on the other side of the send button, right? You told me recently that you had coffee with the contributor at Forbes who covered you, and to be able to build that relationship where someone is in your town and you grab coffee with them is just so tremendous, right? But I think even more than that, it obviously helped you build your mailing list. So before we talk about all the obviously success that you've had and you've been able to sell your company, I want to talk about the survey that you did, because a lot of people they think they can do a survey, but they think it's this huge daunting task. So break it down for us, like how you actually did the survey and how do you incentivize people to actually fill out that survey?
So I think even before we talk about the survey, like what I did for the survey, we got to talk about like why journalists like data, right? It's one thing to go out and to be able to say, my opinion is X, Y, and Z. It's another thing to be able to go out and say, I've talked to hundreds of people, thousands of people, or I have data from, this mobile app that I'm building where thousands of users are doing X, Y, and Z, and it's more or less than, what we saw last year. That data becomes something that within your business only you have, right? Only you have that information. Other companies don't, other people out there might not be seeing the same thing that you're seeing. And so because you're the only one with that information, you have a unique angle and you have a story that you can tell that is different than everything else that's out there. If you go on Google News and you do a search today for like any word, in the parenting space right now, because of Biden's Build Back Better plan, there's a lot of conversation about paid parental leave. And so if you go and you do a search on Google News for paid parental leave, there's hundreds of articles about paid parental leave. And, journalists don't wake up in the morning wanting to write the exact same story as what 50 other journalists have written already out there, right? They want to write unique content, or they want to write they want to break that news. They want to be the first to break that news and then have others follow them, because then they're being the thought leader within the industry. And so Gloria, one of the things that you told me was, when we were hosting the event that I hosted at the beginning of the pandemic to help people find jobs, I invited a few journalists to be panelists at the event. So we had a writer from Fast Company, we had the editor in chief from Inc. Magazine, we had the LinkedIn news editor who writes about jobs. And so we had these journalists participating in the event, but I also had 7,000 people who registered for the event. And as soon as you have a group like that, it was really easy. We used Zoom Webinar to be able to host this online event. And Zoom Webinar has a polling feature where you can send out polls. And so I went out and I asked a few questions like, are you currently looking for a job? Yes or no? How many jobs have you applied to in the last 30 days? And things like, how many interviews have you received in the last 30 days from the number of applications that you have? And, when do you expect to find a job, in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months? And, you can even ask questions like, how do you feel about your job search? Do you feel optimistic about it? Do you feel not optimistic about it? And as soon as you do that, you have data that somebody else can use within a story. And that ends up being really interesting to be able to write about things like the average job seeker at the time was applying to over 100 jobs, right? That tells a story about the economy that's different and also makes it like really tangible for readers to be able to understand what a job seeker is going through at that time. And so I did that survey. And then after that, I went around and I shared some of the data with a few journalists, and it ended up being, facts that they included in their stories. But they did that because it was unique data that they could then use within their articles, which is much, much different than, oh, Vincent heard from one job seeker that they were feeling this way, right? Because that might be how one person's feeling, but it doesn't necessarily mean, that's how Americans are feeling, or it doesn't mean that that's how all parents are feeling. And so with that survey, it gave something really tangible to be able to include in these pitches. Now, I know a lot of people listening to this might be thinking, yeah, but I don't have an event that I'm hosting. I don't have an audience, or I don't have an email list. And, there are so many different ways to do surveys today that that's just one way of doing it. Let's say you go into a Facebook group and you ask the moderators of the Facebook group, hey, I'm doing some market research and I was wondering if I could post a poll in this Facebook group to be able to understand how people feel about X, Y, and Z. I'm not here to promote my company. I'm not here to try to sell a product. I'm just doing research so that I can better understand like how to serve the types of people who are in this Facebook group. And you can post that poll in Facebook and get those results. Most people, have maybe not most people, but a lot of people have, 500 LinkedIn connections. That's 500 people that you can put a survey out to. So you could post a poll on LinkedIn. And what's beautiful about polls on LinkedIn is as soon as somebody votes in your poll, it'll actually rebroadcast that poll out to that person's network. So like, for instance, like let's say on LinkedIn, I only have 2 connections. And one of them is like my brother and the other one is Gloria. But let's say Gloria has 2,000 connections on LinkedIn. If I post a poll on LinkedIn and Gloria votes on that poll and leaves a comment on that poll, that poll will then show up on the news feed for all of Gloria's friends. I only have 2 friends, but she's got 2,000. And now all of a sudden I have the ability for my survey to be able to reach all of Gloria's connections. Yeah, I could do the same thing I could go on and on and on, but Instagram stories have a poll feature. And, just the other day, I sent out a poll asking people how they feel about the future of remote work and whether if they work out of a coffee shop more than one day a week, if they work from home, if they plan to go back into the office. And I tagged a few friends in that Instagram story and they reshared it onto their stories. And like all of a sudden I had more votes on the poll than the small number of Instagram followers that I have. And so there's different ways to be able to do this, but being able to use that data to be able to go out to a journalist and say, hey, I noticed that you wrote an article about paid parental leave. And I actually ran a survey about paid parental leave and how many weeks somebody actually took for their paternity leave or maternity leave and how many weeks they wanted to take. In an ideal world, how many weeks they would have wanted to take. And I haven't shared this with anybody, but I thought it would be interesting for you to see since you wrote an article about that last week. Like that's a way of being able to contribute to a conversation and to be able to start building relationships, because you have to pay into people's buckets before you make a withdrawal, right? Nobody, I think, likes sending out messages where it's like, hey, Gloria, I know on LinkedIn, it looked like you were connected to this person. Can you make an introduction for me? I would really appreciate that favor, right? Nobody feels good sending that where they're like asking for help. But imagine if like all the emails and messages that you're DMing are actually, hey, Gloria, I saw that you wrote an article about, you know, I saw that you wrote an article about the future of work and whether people are going to be going into offices. And, it's so funny. I like posted a survey on my LinkedIn last week about that. And here's what I found. And I talked to a bunch of people. And what was unique was I found out that a lot of people like to do this because they actually prefer to work at night and they want to be able to go to the gym in the afternoon when it's not busy at the gym. But their most productive hours are actually 10 o'clock to midnight. And so that's when they get their work done. And, that was a really interesting article that you wrote. And I wanted to be able to share this with you. Like that's different because you're reaching out and you're helping that person instead of reaching out and just trying to ask, where, editors and journalists get a lot of pitches. And so, imagine how refreshing it would be for them in a sea of pitches to actually get an email where it's like somebody trying to help them.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think it comes from the mindset shift of marketing your features and why your product works, and being like, I'm going to contribute to this larger conversation. Let me be a conduit of information, right? Everyone listening right now, I don't care if you're a mompreneur or if you make soap at home, you have access to your audience. So like, please, let's use that, right? So I love how you talked about surveys. Is there anything else that you've used? So let's say, you did the survey, you pitched them, and then what happened? Like, take us on the journey of what happened after you did the survey.
So, then I would say first and foremost, pitching is about building relationships, right? And so when you have journalists who share their articles, whether they share them on LinkedIn, whether they share them on Twitter, everybody likes it when somebody likes their post, right? Everybody likes it when they get a comment, as long as that comment is not like the really mean ones on YouTube videos and stuff. But everybody loves a comment that's like, wow, I really appreciated this. I found this to be valuable. And so that's the start of building these relationships. And when you build those relationships, it will naturally occur that these journalists, like, they see your email address. They know that the end of your email address is your company page. They'll go to your website. They'll see like what your company is doing. You don't need to sell that, meaning your company website. What you need to sell is yourself and your relationship between you and the journalists that you want to be able to build connections with. And so, part of, I think, being able to build these relationships is if you see that, let's just say at Fast Company, that there's a writer who often writes about a topic that your company is interested in, you should follow that person on Twitter. You should turn on notifications so that you get a notification anytime that they tweet. You should follow them on LinkedIn. You should turn on notifications on LinkedIn so that you get a message anytime that they post on LinkedIn. What's interesting is a lot of these journalists, when they post on Twitter, they get a lot of comments and replies on it. When they post it on LinkedIn, a lot of the times it's like crickets. The same person, the same article, the same post will have like 7 likes and maybe like 1 or 2 comments. And so, if you leave a comment on that LinkedIn post, they're much more likely to see it. And what I love about LinkedIn too is it's super easy for them to be able to then click into your profile and see exactly what you do at what company and go to your company webpage. And that isn't always clear on Twitter, just because you have much, much less space in your Twitter bio. And so if somebody sees you commenting on, let's say, 3 of their posts over the course of a month, by the time that you do send them that email, that's not a cold email anymore, because you've done what's called warming them up, right? And it's a classic sales strategy that a lot of like salespeople use. But you can do the same thing as you're building relationships. And that person ideally would then, when they get that email, they would go, huh, I recognize this name. This is the person that left, all these positive comments on the articles that I posted in the past. They must be really interested in what I'm writing. Oh, wow, this is interesting. Like, they're sharing something that they've learned, or they're seeing, or trend that they're seeing. Maybe this would be an interesting person to talk to. And once you get to that point, then, you're not asking them, they're asking you. They'll come to you and say, hey, Vince, is it possible to get 20 minutes of your time to be able to chat? I'm actually working on a story on X, Y, and Z, and I'm wondering what your viewpoints are on X, Y, and Z.
That's awesome. So you did the search. So just to recap, I mean, so much good knowledge. I hope everyone's listening that's taking notes. So use a survey. It could be as simple as doing a shout out on Instagram or using a poll feature on LinkedIn. And then also follow the journalists on Twitter and LinkedIn and warm them up by liking their articles before you send them the email. So let's talk about the actual email stage. Is there something that you've learned that works in terms of timing or subject lines or something like that can increase your open rates?
Shorter is better. I think I'd be curious on your perspective on that. But I always find that like when I sit down to write one of these emails, like all of a sudden I'm like looking at like 1,000-word email. in my first draft, and I can tell you my long emails have not worked. I mean, what do you think about that, Gloria?
Well, that's why the CPR method works, because it actually, I love bullet points. But I also think the subject line is important, because I think a lot of people in the subject line want to do something that's very gimmicky, and that's such a turnoff. So have you noticed something that's worked really well for you in terms of subject line or timing, or maybe the cadence of follow up?
So in terms of timing, I usually write them like towards the end of the week, but I wouldn't send it out on a Friday. You and I are recording this on a Friday. Like, I'm not going to get off this podcast and go send out a bunch on a Friday afternoon. So I typically like to schedule them. I use Google, whether you use Outlook or whatever, you can schedule your emails. So I typically schedule them for about 7:30 in the morning on a Monday or a Tuesday in that person's local time. So like if I see on LinkedIn that that person lives in New York, then I'll send it out at 7:30 in the morning New York time. I don't have like quantifiable data to say like that's absolutely the best time to do it, but that's typically what I do. Is I try to avoid the end of the week. I typically go for the beginning of the week. And in terms of subject line, I would say the big one is instead of going for like the clickbaity types of subject lines, I would just think of like the types of subject lines I would use, like if I was sending emails to a friend. Like if I was sending an email to Gloria about, something, it's a more casual subject line. I'm not using all caps. I'm not trying to do something gimmicky like putting Gloria's name, in the subject line. I'm not using a bunch of emojis. And a lot of the times, like, simple tends to work for me. But it could be it could be um as simple as you know your article last week on millennial parents.
Yeah.
And I might open up the email with just like one sentence about an article that they wrote last week, how much I liked it, what I thought about it, and then go into something that furthers the conversation.
Yeah. How do you end it? How do you end it? Because a lot of people feel scared to ask, but we all know that the email is a pitch. So how do you like to end the email?
There's a there's a term in journalism that's called like burying the lead. So
Hmm.
like burying the lead is where you've all seen it. It's like before like a news broadcast goes to commercial, this person did this incredible thing. After this commercial, stay tuned to find out what it was. And in the emails, I think it's better personally not to bury the lead. So like in the bullet points, like I would put that, opening paragraph, and I use the word paragraph lightly because I'm like my paragraphs are like 2 sentences long, 3 bullet points for, yeah, and it could be something as simple as simple as 45% of the dads that I talked to found that doing this with their child made their child happier in my community. And then at the end, I would just say, if you're interested in going deeper on any of this data, happy to chat. I usually just leave it at that.
Yeah, I love it. It's friendly, it's collaborative, it's not begging, it's not please feature me in your gift guide. So okay, so you took us from the survey data, the tone of the email, and then at what point do they, first of all, obviously it's all in the follow
Oh,
up, right?
sorry to cut you off. Email signature. Let's talk email
Oh,
signature. Do not make it hard for that person to reach you, because what sometimes I've found is like they're working on a story and they have a deadline, right? And if you make it hard to schedule time with you, they might go to somebody else who's just easier to reach because they have to send that piece in by the end of the day. So in your email signature, I always have a cell phone number in there. And I always put not just like cell phone, but I put call/text after the
mm,
phone number, because a lot of the times, they know because they work with so many sources, that a lot of times, a lot of the people that they talk to have back-to-back meetings. And so they'll call, but then they'll shoot a text right away. And so make it super, super easy for them to be able to reach you. And you'll be surprised like how often that actually happens, where they'll try to reach you once, and if they can get a hold of you, like you just made it easier for them to get their story on time.
Yeah.
But if it takes 2 days for them to schedule time on your calendar, you might miss the train.
Exactly. I mean, one of my clients who I actually got her to speak to someone at The Guardian, she didn't run the story. Almost a year later, that same person messaged me back and was like, is someone available today? So it might take you 10 months, but you want to be there at the right place at the right time. So I'm so glad you said call/text. And then in terms of follow up, right? Because we all know it's not just one email, it's multiple. I teach this as well in my PR starter pack. Can you talk to me about follow up? Because a lot of people are so afraid of following up.
Yeah, my follow up. So like, I typically wait 2 to 3 days, so I don't follow up right away. And my follow up usually is just a reply to that first email that I'll actually usually do from my phone. So I'll just reply from my phone so that it leaves like the sent from my iPhone, and it'll just be simple. Gloria, just checking if you saw this note,
Mm-hmm.
and
Nice.
that's
What
it.
about Instagram or LinkedIn?
Um, Instagram or LinkedIn, yeah, Instagram or LinkedIn. I mean, the same thing continues, right? Like before you reach out, you want to reply to their tweets and comment on their LinkedIn posts, and afterwards you would keep doing the same. Like I personally, like I won't do like the slide into the Twitter DMs and be like, hey, I sent you an email. Did you see my email? Right? Because you already sent them an email. They saw the email. You don't need to send them a DM asking them if they saw your email, because you already sent them the email. Instead, what I'll do is I'll leave a helpful comment, a positive comment on their posts. And people when they see faces, like the same face on that email avatar versus, your social media profile pic, like they'll put two and two together.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually less patient than you. I actually tell people to follow up, not just saying, hey, did you see my email? But also, encapsulate kind of in a more concise way what the pitch is and say, by the way, I sent you more information in this email, because people just don't read their emails. I mean, obviously you want to install an email tracker, but um, you want to just remind them to keep reading that email. And this is another thing, is so many founders think, oh my God, I'm bothering them. I can't follow up more than once. Have you ever once gotten a journalist that's like, you're not allowed to follow up with me?
No, I don't think that's ever happened.
Yeah,
I mean, the worst case scenario is somebody doesn't reply.
exactly. So it's worth it because the benefits are so huge, right? Now, in terms of following up, I would say, I teach my starter pack students as like follow up like every week, until they respond. If you really have a good pitch, maybe change up the subject line a little bit, but it's can't tell you the number of times it's just that one more follow up more than you're comfortable with, and then boom, you get a reply.
I agree with that. I think like however many follow-ups you're comfortable with sending, send one more than that, because you have nothing to lose. The worst that'll happen is they don't reply. And I've even heard from a friend that their follow-up is they just send the exact same email they sent the first time, and they'll send it 1 week later.
Yeah.
Not as a reply. They'll just send it as if it was like a fresh email. And I asked this person, well, why do you do that? And they said, it helps the other person save face. And what he means by that is like the other person doesn't have to explain why they were ignoring the email, because you just sent them the email as if it was like the first email.
Yeah.
So the other person can just pretend like they didn't never saw the first email, and they can just reply to the second email right away as if it was the first email, but it allows that person to be able to save face. And I haven't tried that, but I thought it was a really cool strategy or an idea.
I love that. I mean, I always tell people, feel uncomfortable. Like you should be so following up to the point where you feel uncomfortable, because you are competing with these very pushy PR people that are getting paid way more, right? And so now that you've done it yourself, you know that it's all about the follow up. Are there any other do's and don'ts or things that you found that works well or maybe doesn't work well?
I would say, read the news in your industry. Like if you want to be able to contribute to the conversation, like you have to be a part of that conversation. You have to understand that conversation. And so, the venture that I'm working on right now, it's called Parents Club. Parents Club started because my first daughter was born about 2.5 years ago while I was launching this first business. She actually made a guest appearance on that online summit that I did. And I realized as a father that I wanted to do everything that I could to be the best father that I could possibly be. But there's so many resources out there that are really geared towards moms. And there's a lot of really great resources for moms, but I didn't really find, the modern father content that I was looking for, the modern parenting content, because like the modern families now, oftentimes have two working parents. And as soon as you have two working parents, all of the traditional gender roles, all of the traditional gender norms go out the window because you have moms who are returning back to work. You have these childcare problems that working parents are facing, but you also have fathers taking on roles that traditionally they wouldn't, because in order for moms to be successful in the workplace, dads need to step up at home. Dads need to take their fair share of the work at home in order for their partners to also be successful at work. And it's not fair for one partner to have to do all the work at home and also have all of the work that she does at work as well. And so, this was an example of something that I was seeing not only for myself, but I was seeing it within my community, within my company. My parents club members were telling me that they were also facing these similar challenges. And so I went out and I looked for journalists who also had these similar viewpoints. And what I found were, these journalists that were facing the same experiences as a working parent, that were facing the same childcare shortages or daycares that were shutting down while they still had deadlines to be able to meet. And so this is an example of something that I'm seeing and experiencing in my personal life. I go to my community that I'm building, and community, I use the word community lightly. Like, yes, it could be like a structured community, like a forum on your site, a Slack that you run with your clients or with your customers. But community could also just simply be the comments in the social media profiles for your company. But I'm seeing something within my community, and then I'm commenting on the posts from these journalists when they're talking about those areas. That is what allows me to be able to further that conversation and add to that conversation. And it also allows me to be able to better serve my community as well through my product. When you know what your customers are facing at a deep level, when you understand their fears, their aspirations, their hopes, their desires, their dreams, this is what allows you to be able to create great products and services for them. But this too also allows you to be able to be a part of that story that journalists want to write about.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and I also recommend for anyone that's listening is install a Google News alert. At least the subject lines and the keywords and start to train yourself so that, because now Vincent can send an email very quickly and knowing what's in the subject line. But if you're starting out, like start to train yourself to do that. So now you've had all this press success. How are you able to leverage it for other aspects of your business?
So, the press is one part of the growth strategy for any business. And I would say the biggest thing that it does is provides you social proof and credibility, right? Social proof and credibility. People naturally want, like if you, like Gloria, if you and I were like walking down the street in New York and there was like this storefront and there was like this long line of people standing outside of the store, but you had no idea what was going on there, like we would be interested about it, right? Because you're like, wow, all of these other people are standing in line. There must be something here worth waiting for. And that's what this press does, is because it creates digital social proof for your business. And so it's kind of like a fuel that's like the accelerator for your business. I think a lot of people expect, oh, if I could just get this one piece, I won't have to do anything else for my business. Like customers will just come flooding to my business. And experienced entrepreneurs know it's a little bit more nuanced than that, right? You still have to build relationships with your customers. You still should have a good social media presence where you're engaging with your community. It doesn't have to be across all channels, right? Just pick one or two to start and just do those well. But when those news articles get published, a lot of the times, they will tag your company. They'll tag your personal LinkedIn profile or your personal Twitter account in their posts. Within the news articles, the bigger the publication is, the less likely they are to actually link to your website in the actual article. But you will get people who are Googling your company after they read that article. And so it is important to be able to have blog posts for them to find on Google. But the biggest thing is it creates that awareness around your brand, and it provides credibility and social proof because it tells somebody who hasn't heard about your brand, other people are talking about this. Maybe you should check it out. It's the equivalent of that long line outside of your store that's just pulling in interest.
Yeah. And now you're such a master at your story, both from the marketing point of view and PR, because those are two very separate messages. And I think a lot of people just, like you said in the beginning, the agencies, they just give the journalists their marketing speak, but that's not a news story, right? So now you know how to be invited to every table, you know exactly how to have a value-driven conversation. What would you tell the other founders who are listening and saying, well, I don't have the success that Vincent has. I don't have these, whatever, all the limiting beliefs, right? What would you tell them just to nudge them in the right direction? Because this is not rocket science, right? Anyone can do this.
Yeah, there was a book, Gloria, that I know you and I have both read, which is Launch by Jeff Walker. A really great book about being able to launch products, and all types of products, whether you sell digital goods, whether you sell physical goods, whether you provide services. It's just about being able to, do what the book says, which is launch. And one of the stories that he tells in the book that I thought was really interesting was this story about leaving the parking lot after, I think it was a football game. When you're in a parking lot and there's like all these cars and you're in a traffic jam, you're all trying to get onto the highway. Everybody's trying to go to the same place. Most of the time you stand, you wait in line. Well, the story is about this person who gets out of the car and they take a flashlight and they just start shining the flashlight directing cars. And all of a sudden, cars got out of the way and this car just pulls out of the parking lot. And the reason that that happened is because that person had authority, that person had credibility, and other people saw that credibility and authority. That's why the cars moved and they got rolling and that car got out of the parking lot. In this story, like, nobody gave that person authority. Nobody gave that person credibility. They just got out of the car and started shining a flashlight. And, building authority and credibility, I think it's really easy to be able to look at all of these things and to go, oh, 40 under 40, Forbes Council, featured in Fast Company, got quoted in Forbes last week, and to go, I can never do that. And the truth of the matter is the majority of the people that you read about and have those logos on their website, they're not anything special. At the end of the day, I woke up this morning, I did some reading, I got my kids dressed, I dropped off my daughters at school, I came home, I made breakfast for myself, had coffee, and now I'm here recording a podcast. But like, there's nothing special about me. And, a lot of, I'm a nobody, right? But one day I woke up and I wanted to be a part of the conversation. I wanted to start building relationships and I wanted to serve my customers. I wanted to serve my members of Parents Club and help them be great parents and help their families thrive. And I wanted to be able to share the story of these communities and what these people are feeling during the pandemic with journalists who could further help other parents be successful in raising their kids during these really, really challenging times.
I think when you remember your why, everything else seems so easy because you're not worried about coming off as salesy. You're so focused on your why. So thank you so much for inspiring us, for giving us not only mindset tricks, but actual tangible, tactical things that we can all do. And I encourage everyone to re-listen to the episode because Vincent gives us so many different pointers on how he was able to use a starter pack after having worked with big agencies. So we're kind of at the top of the hour. Is there one last parting thought that you want to leave my audiences with?
No, if anybody wants to connect with me, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are open. And after this, if anybody's listening and you're a parent, This website doesn't exist yet, but we'll get it up by the time this episode publishes. But we'll get some type of special offer for your listeners. I always want to be. You've heard on this episode, I want to be able to help as many people that I can. But parents.club/Gloria. We'll check that out. We'll make that new website for you, but we'll have some type of special gift for Parents Club for any parents who are listening. These are really, really hard times as a parent. Give yourself some grace and give yourself some space. And just know, if you're a parent and you're listening to this, it is really hard to build a business. And it's also really, really hard to be a parent. And it's even harder to do both of those things at the same time. And just remind yourself, no matter how hard today was with you, whether it's with your kids, whether it's with a customer that you had, whether it was, some type of emergency at work, you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job. But come join me, come join my community, parents.club/Gloria, and we'll get some type of special gift for you there.
So awesome. Thank you so much, Vincent, for inspiring us all.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Oh, wow. I love that. You're so inspiring, Vincent.